Yes, all. Welcome to our discussion. We appreciate you joining in as we discuss how to effectively create learning opportunities for our students. Before we go any further, I will turn it over to Dr. Wall for welcome.
Anna, first of all, welcome to everyone who's joining us. We're really thrilled to have people participate in this discussion of online learning and good practices. Our goal today really is to provide some examples, concrete examples of practice and online teaching. It's another way that we can support faculty in the School of Education and perhaps even faculty who are joining us who are outside the School of Education as we approach teaching online this summer. Again, a tremendous appreciation to the School of Education community, which has done, I think, a really remarkable and resilient job of moving really seamless to teaching online. And one of my comments is I think that we have done a great job as we ended this semester, but the stakes will become different as we move to a full semester of teaching online in terms of student expectations. And so we want to provide you with examples and tools and supports that you need to have a really good learning experience for students and hopefully help you to master some new skills. So please let us know, give us feedback about how this goes and what additional resources you need. But thanks again for joining us, and I'm going to turn it back to Nena.
Let's talk about who's going to be on the panelists this afternoon. As you just heard, Dr. Wall is our Dean of School of Ed. We also have Dr. Reynolds, who supports faculty teaching in School of Counseling and also clinical mental health. Dr. Knox, supporting faculty teaching administration, higher ed. Dr. Howard, supporting faculty teaching multiple and single subject and curriculum and instruction. Dr. Magzi, supporting faculty teaching, multi-education, special education, ADSP, and Ms. O'Hara, supporting faculty serving as university supervisors for fieldwork. So the purpose of this, the function anyways, what we're really going to be doing as a team is showing you some practical examples on how to facilitate effective online instruction. We will be emphasizing a variety of tools. Please don't be overwhelmed. You don't have to try every tool, but use it as examples of things that you may choose to try out if you were interested. So there's tons of resources. We know as a department and as a university that this is challenging to move on to the online learning space, and we are trying to do our best to make sure we are providing you with tons of resources. Dr. Howard?
Hi, everyone. So just wanted to give you a bit of context because we know we do have many faculty on here who are School of Ed, but we also have some faculty joining us who are not within the School of Education. And so we wanted to give you our lens. We do have mostly graduate students in the School of Education. We do teach undergrads through our teaching and learning department. So, and then we wanted to make sure, as Nina mentioned, that technology does not drive our pedagogy. So that being said, going back to what I just mentioned, much of what we will share can be used in a face-to-face session or in an online learning space with undergrads and with graduates. We just really want to emphasize prioritizing effective instruction in any learning space. Moving on to the next slide. This framework here, you'll see this as you begin to explore some of our ACITS resources. You may see a different set of concentric circles where you'll see social presence, cognitive presence, and then teaching presence. This one offers a bit more detail, and we really want to encourage thinking about these categories as you work to ensure you're addressing the 4 best practices that we'll demonstrate later. So the social presence is all about making sure that we're thinking about our teaching and prioritizing thinking about our students. Cognitive presence is where we begin to assess and engage and really work with them. And then of course the teaching present, remembering to stay active with the students as they go through that educational experience, which is that center wheel there. I will, once I pass over, I'll drop the link to further resources and research behind this framework. This particular framework, the study behind it has been cited close to 3,000 times when it comes to talking about online learning. So we find it to be something that's very relevant and also practical. You'll even see within the ACITS resources where they expand upon this and discuss how we can address the Bloom's taxonomy within this framework.
First question for the panelists is, what is your process as you develop an online course?
About the students that I'm going to be dealing with. I'm looking at demographics. By that I mean, are they first-time learners? Are they working parents? Are they career changers? Are they first-generation learners? This is important to figure out the best ways of communicating what I'm trying to communicate to them and how to engage them in the process. Why are they taking the course? And how many courses have they taken before, for example? Have they taken, are they like seniors? Are they doing in their first term? All of those considerations help me figure out just how I would approach them with the material and how I would engage them. Most of all, I am asking, what is it that I really want to communicate to them? What is it that I want them to take away from the course? And once I've outlined those, I have the basis for my various units that I will develop for the course.
I also like to think about the demographics of my students. Who are they? But in addition to that, I also like to emphasize, try to think about my learning goals, my objectives. What do I want my students to take away? And I have a template that was created by Ryan Glidden. And it gives me a general structure of what are my main takeaways that I want my students to see. And so it starts with the agenda. It goes into, it gives me a flow for each class. So it has the agenda for each class. I have my PowerPoint for each class, and the breakdown on Moodle that gives me a general structure and also lesson highlights. And my students seem to thrive with that structure.
Things to consider about students and their needs when preparing to teach online. I will go to Dr. Howard on this.
Okay, thanks. So some of the things I like to think about, some of them were already named by Dr. Mogsy and Dr. Reynolds, just thinking about the population of students first. I would also say one thing that we don't often think about when we're face-to-face is whether or not the Wi-Fi or the connectivity or broadband is sufficient for teaching, because we make assumptions because we're on the school campus when we're using the technology within the classroom walls. But I also, when we're making this shift to online, I like to find out ahead of time from my students what they're dealing with, what things will work for them within their home learning space. Will they be able to still meet synchronously? That allows me to think about whether or not I need to design asynchronous learning opportunities as opposed to always meeting face-to-face using WebEx, for example. So I like to also think about what they have access to, what resources they have available to them. And I know we'll talk about this later, but I also like to think about, especially right now, whether or not they have financial resources when it comes to accessing the textbook. And I'll offer some ways I've worked around that with students too. So those are a couple of the things I think about when preparing to teach online.
Okay. Ms. O'Hara, do you have an input on this, Natalie?
Yeah, so my perspective's coming from being an advisor to students in the Department of Teaching and Learning, and the conversations I've had with a lot of students in preparation for the summer semester. And I've been thinking a lot about the expectations that students have, expectations that they had when they started this program, expectations they had going into the summer, and how that's changed because of the coronavirus. We did an online orientation for our new group that's starting classes this summer. And Nena, if you can give me the ability to share my screen, I did want to share our survey that we did with the students. We do this survey every semester with our new group, and so the questions haven't changed, but I do think the context or the implications of the coronavirus maybe shifts how we consider some of this information we gather from our students. Can we see this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we had 116 students fill out this survey, and we asked them how long it's been since they were last in school. So 73 of them, it's been less than 2 years. 24, it's been 2 to 5 years. 12, it's been 5 to 10. 7, it's been 10 to 15 years. So, you know, what were they expecting when they, especially for these ones who it's been 5 to 10 to 15 years since they were last in school, what were they expecting when they were returning? Online certainly wasn't what they were anticipating. No one signed up to be an online teacher or an online student. So how can we help meet their expectations despite the fact that the learning modules has changed slightly? 63 of them are first generation students, 12 of them are alumni of Redlands, 26 of them are parents, and 4 of them are a caregiver for a loved one. So especially with these, thinking about how are they balancing being at home, sharing their devices potentially with their students or with their children who are also learning from home. We also asked them about their employment. So 37 of them were working part-time, 40 are full-time, 62 are substitutes. So what has shifted in their job status potentially? If a lot of them were gaining their income as a substitute, they haven't been able to sub in the past few weeks. So has that been affecting them? I read through a lot of their responses of things that they were most excited about and things that they were nervous about. And things they're excited about are, a lot of them are just like, being one step closer to their dream of becoming a teacher. And I think despite the fact that the modules have changed, how can we help emphasize to them that the tools that we're teaching them and the skills that they're going to be learning are still going to meet their, help them meet their goal of becoming a teacher and an effective teacher. A lot of them talked about being excited to connect with their community. So maybe that's something to think about as we're teaching them online. How can we still frame that community for them? A lot of their answers of things they're nervous about are related to the exams that they're going to take, so the CSET exams. And that's been a huge question I've been fielding a lot lately with our students is with testing centers being closed, when are they going to be able to take their exams? How is this going to affect as they were planning to student teach? And not just this brand new crop of students for this summer, but our students who've been in the program for 2 to 3 semesters who were hoping to student teach or get an internship for the fall. And everything is just in an unknown zone right now. So when I've been asked about CSETs, I've been trying to help them focus on the things that are in their control. So no, we don't know that when the testing centers are going to open, but you can control studying for your exams. So how can we help them, I guess, just think more about their expectations and reframe them with this new type of learning we're going to do this summer?
Thank you so much. That was very meaningful information. A question to the panel. How do you deliver instruction of your courses? Do you use synchronous or asynchronous delivery models? Why or why not? I will go to Dr. Knox on this.
Thank you so much. So under normal circumstances, I've typically taught with a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous online opportunities for my students. I found that generally the feedback from them is that they really like that synchronous time to build community, not just with me, but with each other. But these are not normal circumstances that we're under. And I think Natalie did a really great job of pointing out that like our students didn't necessarily sign up for an online program. They didn't sign up for teaching full-time and being caretakers in the middle of a shelter-in-place order. And so following the wisdom of one of my great colleagues, Dr. Alvarado, I actually surveyed all of my students before deciding whether to do synchronous or asynchronous options in class to find out, like what their actual tech access is, and B, what their time access is. I think under normal circumstances, we expect if a student signs up for an online class that they will have the infrastructure and time to support that. But I think right now it's really important under these contexts to check in with students to figure out what's going to work for them. And then I think about my learning goals for each week or unit, both in terms of content and skill. I really focus on how to build communication skills, whether it be oral or written, and be really explicit about that in each class. And then maximizing student engagement. So if it is asynchronous, figuring out how to modify an idea like think, pair, share asynchronously, and having that happen over a period of minutes, so that they get one-on-one engagement with other students in the class, as well as larger group interaction.
Similarly, I found that to use a mixture of both synchronous and asynchronous seems to be helpful to students. I found that when I expect students to come on synchronously, not everyone is able to. Some of my students are parents and they have 3 other students who are using their devices during the day. And they say literally the only time we can have alone is late at night or going into our car in hibernation. So I've tried to be more mindful of the realities of students presently during this time. And so I think being mindful of that, providing the opportunity to connect synchronously, providing the opportunity for them to enter into your WebEx room, but also providing spaces where students can interact asynchronously. And I think we're going to have really good examples of that later on. So it doesn't, yeah.
No, go ahead, Kenya.
No, so ultimately, I think a mixture is good, and to be realistic about our expectations and be flexible about the realities and dynamics of this time.
Thank you. Dr. Reynolds, is there anything you wanted to add that hasn't already been said?
On this question, I prefer to think about the equation of synchronous versus asynchronous as one that one about engagement. I use synchronous sessions primarily for engagement, not for conveying information. I convey information about assignments or expectations, but generally speaking, not to convey, not to deliver information or content for the class. I use other media to deliver content. But the synchronous sessions are primarily to promote engagement, discussion between students, help them understand my expectations, talk about feedback that I'm giving them on their assignments, and that sort of thing. So synchronous, I think about them differently and what I'm attempting to do. And that helps me determine just how much time I will allocate. Generally speaking, for synchronous sessions, I don't typically go more than an hour for synchronous sessions.
One thing while I'm preparing to share my screen, we did have one question that came in asking, how long should PowerPoints be? So Conroy, I know you do multiple modalities, and I know sometimes it's hard to say, exactly how long it should be when you do a combination, but can you maybe share with us how you consider length of your video or length of time for your PowerPoint if you do over talking on the PowerPoint? Can you maybe share some thoughts with us about that?
Sure. It is a good consideration because both the research and my own experience has demonstrated that the shorter is better, generally speaking. So if I'm doing a video, for example, it usually doesn't go more than 5 to 7 minutes. For a PowerPoint presentation, just about the same. If I do a PowerPoint presentation, in a synchronous session, for example, it's not going to go more than 6 to 7 minutes. It's basically to introduce the subject, talk about the major concepts that we will be discussing. Usually at the beginning of the week, I'll do that, but it wouldn't be very long. People get very disconnected very quickly when you're doing PowerPoint presentations, online, and there are lots of distractions. People lie down and fall asleep if you do that. There are all kinds of things. People are at home that will distract them from listening to you. The students will be playing on messaging one another, and all sort of things. So you don't want to get bogged down into that. You get it set, get it done, and move on.
Great, thank you.
You assess your students' needs and prior knowledge.
Okay, so one way to assess, remember we're showing different ways we do it. It doesn't have to be the way that you do it. But for me, I like to, at the beginning of this the semester, sometimes before the semester begins, I like to create a Google form where I can ask some questions of the students. So I do this on the ground or online. This one happens to be one that I use for our qualitative research methods course for doctoral students. So I lay out my little letter in the beginning, and then I have some open-ended questions that are really about their expectations and what their personal goals are for what they hope to gain from the course. This helps me to drive instruction and to think about what I might include as far as, even look at number 3, what type of in-class activities aid in your learning of course material. If I have a bunch of students who say here, collaboration with my classmates, then I'm definitely thinking about how I integrate rich collaborative opportunities for them. So I use all of these data to inform my direction. And then the next one, I throw it in. They don't like it, but I do it anyway. I would like to get a baseline measure of their knowledge coming in. And so I do ask some questions about things that I plan to cover in the course, but I let them know ahead of time, don't stress, this is not a quiz. You won't be graded. I just want to get an idea of what I need to cover. And by giving them that sort of permission to answer just what they know, I have fewer people who Google and more who just take the risk and answer. And then again, I use those data to inform the direction and also what things I focus more on.
I'll share a little bit about kind of what the expectation is. I like to set ground rules with the students and have them actually help me set those rules. So what are the expectations that they expect from me, their peers, each other? So I actually share a Google document, and we come up together simultaneously with class norms. Let me just read.
So this is for your online classes?
I actually do it. I think it can be done in both. I think it's just sets the expectation of what we expect from each other in our online interactions and if we are in person. I think it works for both.
Good teaching.
So I just kind of tell them the research about why relationships in education are important, and then I have the students kind of brainstorm what they need from themselves to be successful in the course, what they need from their peers, and then what they need from each other. And if they're in agreement, they can put asterisks. And then eventually they each send me 3 or 4 kind of values that they value at their core. And then I compile them and show their commonalities in terms of their values. So basically talk about the importance of relationship building. And I send them this, this document, and they all have access to it digitally through Google Docs, and they simultaneously work on creating what they need from each other to be, or from themselves to be successful, what they need from their fellow students to be successful, and then what they need from the instructor. And I have this on Moodle, so they can always refer back to it. And then I ultimately ask them to either email me, or if it's an in-person class, I give out little sheets of paper. I say, please write down 4 virtues or things or that you value in your life. And these are some of what my students have in one class brainstormed. And then the asterisks indicate what they have in common.
We have a request for you to scroll back up to the top really quickly.
Sure.
Thank you. And then Andrew's going to jump in here. Let's make sure he's unmuted. There we go.
I need to stop.
Thanks. Oh, you don't have to stop sharing. I was going to comment that something else you can do to assess student needs is, as I've used the example of having students actually create short videos to introduce themselves and to respond to some questions at the start of an online class. So you know, if you give them 2 or 3 questions about why they took the class and something they want to tell about themselves, it allows them to introduce themselves. And then you create an activity where everyone else has to comment on other students' videos so that they can see their work. And I see a question in the text box about when you have class presentations. And I've used this the exact same way for assignments, where you have students create video and then you have an activity over the course of a week where students have to comment on each other's performance on videos, specifically in teaching methods classes, right? So you actually use technology to get people to comment on different aspects. You might even have a form that they have to evaluate the practice of their peer. So it creates an exchange between people where they're getting feedback about what's going on. And then I think I was supposed to also talk about articulating learning goals. And I have used actually first in in-person classes, I would put a short video that outlined why we were reading what we were reading each week and what the learning goals for the class were. And I would post that prior to the week's in-person class meeting. Sometimes when I would run out of steam towards the end of a semester, I would forget to post that, and students would get upset because I got the feedback that it's one of the things I really enjoyed is understanding exactly why a reading was assigned and what we were supposed to be taking from it. So I think that is a really good tool in person, but I also think it's a good tool when it's online to give people articulation of why we've chosen what we're chosen to read. And then the second thing is just to directly post each week in what is our LMS Moodle the learning goals for that week, and then to make explicit connections between learning goals and the activities that we're doing online. And so I often will try both. It depends upon how much time you have to prepare, right? If we're preparing a class on a week-to-week basis like we were at the end of this semester, I think it's really hard to do videos. If you have more time for planning, that's great. And then I was simply, because I was teaching this spring, I was simply posting learning goals as a part of Moodle for each week that was online to orient students. Nicole, I think you have other examples.
I do actually, and I'll share my screen again. And it kind of fits perfectly with everything that Andrew just described. So kind of what he described, I'm just going to show you what it would look like as we build that out in Moodle. So you'll see here, here's like section 1, which would be like my week 1 if I were to. So section 1, you'll see here, this video, of course, would have me talking about it, but you can also do audio using Kaltura where you don't have a video. And then here I have the learning goals actually typed out, which are also discussed there in the video. And then something that Kimmy and I were also talking about recently, it is having this page that gives an agenda. So now the students know what is expected of them throughout that entire week, right? So it's all here, what they have to read, what they need to view, some of the activities they'll have to do, but most importantly, the learning objectives are visible.
I have to say, having taught online previously, and I've taught one of the courses that you designed, Nicole, it's super helpful to have a short summary. It's usually nothing longer than a minute or 2. It helps me get my mind around what's supposed to be happening for the week. It also helps the students, those that are visual, they can, watch. Those that need something written up, they can also see it right beneath. And it's super easy to do. So I think for some of the adjuncts who are, venturing into the online space, this is something you can do in so many different ways. But the biggest, I think, goal here is to make sure that you know what the objectives are for the week and your students have an understanding of what the expectations are. Kimia, do you have your page up?
For example, this is class 11 of my Foundations of Learning class, where we're talking about isms and racism. So students automatically know what the theme of the class is going to be. They know the day of the class. Also, then I have kind of the lesson highlights, and then students automatically know, for example, the agenda, where the agenda is. They can open the agenda and they can see the readings of the course and the media that goes along with the course and the learning objectives. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this week we were talking about funds of knowledge. So I have a video from Louise Moll. I have a demonstration. So there's actual apps for them to look at in terms of communication. So this kind of not only helps the students, but also organizes me as well.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another question. What examples can you share on how you engage students with the learning content?
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to talk about two tools that I have actually used in both online and face-to-face classes to support learning. Maximize this, get it bigger. So the first tool I'm going to talk about is Yammer. And if anyone from our education technology department is listening right now, thank you so much. They do a great training every fall before school starts. I go every year because I always leave with at least two tools that make my teaching better, whether it's face-to-face or online. And all of these, the tools that I'm going to be presenting are both tools that I learned from them. So the first is Yammer, and we have access to Yammer through the University of Redlands site. So if you go onto my Redlands, it's part of the little waffle up in the upper left-hand corner. I think it's part of the Microsoft suite of products. It's really like having a personal Facebook account just with your students. It operates just like social media, where they can post news stories, they can write comments. I found to maximize engagement on this that it is both open to all students all the time and also required for some students each week. So I have them sign up to be in charge of each week, and they each student, for example, in this class, each student had to sign up for 1 or 2 weeks where they would post at least 2 or 3 news articles that pertain to things that we were talking about in class and leadership. So this was an education leadership class. And a lot of them, as you can see from the comments, they're really tying it into events of the day, news stories, and what was happening in their own contexts. And they engaged with each other in the chat features or in the comment features, which is, exactly what they do on social media. So it was a way to use social media as a learning tool. The second tool that I'm going to talk about is Padlet, which I use all the time because I think that learning is reinforced with visuals. I always find that I learn best if I have to either draw something out or find a picture that represents it. And I know that some of my students work the same way. So I find this to be a very compelling tool for that. So when talking about different leadership approaches, I've done this both in small groups and on an individual basis, having them find pictures that represent the concept. And you can see that some of them got really, really good examples, like quid pro quo. The Silence of the Lambs I thought was brilliant for transactional leadership, and chameleon for adaptive leadership. I thought that, the students were really able to hone in on the key aspects. It also has been a really helpful tool in identifying when students are off track. Because they also had to explain their picture, if they couldn't explain it adequately, or the picture just seemed really off for the concept, it's a great tool for identifying, like, okay, we need to go back and reinforce this idea. It's another opportunity for other students to intervene and be like, oh, I like that picture. I wonder what this means, or how could that be different? So I think it's a really helpful tool. It's super easy to use. It's free for educators, so you can just sign up for an account, and I mean, it's pretty quick. Students have caught on to how to use it really quickly. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass to Kimia to share some tools.
So I too have found Padlet to be a really easy device to use for students to share. I even use it just for them to introduce themselves, and it's really convenient because I can refer back to their pictures and just kind of get a glimpse of what their name was, who they are, and that's how I memorize who my students are within the first few days of class. I also really like Flipgrid. What's really interesting is Flipgrid can really be used by any age. I have a TKer at home, and he's constantly using Flipgrid. I use it for my university master's students. So for example, in that same class that we learned about isms, I had my students post responses on Flipgrid. So they just press the record button and they record themselves, and they can share their screen. So here I asked them to think about media representations of isms, and so like you literally can click on a student. I have the student's permission.
This post from Barbie Savior that just kind of brings light on the way that social media perpetuates this idea of the United States being poor, and any countries that we label as third world countries being, the United States being rich and so-called third world countries being poor.
So you kind of get a glimpse, sorry, I cut it short, but you get a glimpse of the student. The students can save their photo, and they can record themselves, or they can share their screen and record actual content that they want to talk about. I find this Flipgrid to be really easy to use, and a great resource. I created another one for my fall class. I haven't used it yet. So I would log in with my Microsoft login, and it's pretty straightforward.
So I was going to show one of the things that I use is Epuzzle. So I know we often incorporate videos like TED Talks or YouTube videos into our courses. What I like about Epuzzle is that it allows you to pull the YouTube or TED Talk video into their platform, and you can embed questions. So this allows you to do like checkpoints to make sure that, you know, your students are watching the video, or more importantly, that you're able to have them engage with the content. And maybe you want to ask them a question to have them think, you know, more critically about something that they've viewed. So, and I'll drop the link in the chat for you all to check out later. So here is a TED Talk. This one is about teaching math without words, a visual approach to learning math from Mind Research Institute. This I've used this particular video in the STEM methods course for multiple subject teaching candidates. And this comes up on their end where they can watch the video. And as they watch the video, it will stop them at these 3 breakpoints that are kind of highlighted at the bottom. And let's see if the question comes up on our end. Yep, it does. And so then it stops, and I ask, The speaker tries to justify why words are barriers to learning. What are his justifications? And so they answer the question right here. You can also adjust the settings to allow students to progress forward until they've responded to the question. And so that sometimes prompts them to go back and rewatch to make sure that they've gathered what they need from the content. So they can rewatch. This one I allowed them to skip, or because I'm the creator, I can skip, I should say. The viewer can't skip, so they'll have to go back and rewatch or respond. All of these come up, you set up like a class account, so all of their answers come up in one place, so you can actually look down at all students. I wonder if I have a class where I can go.
So do they have to get the answers correct?
They don't have to get them correct, but if they're open-ended, right, it would be, they have to wait on me to give feedback, but you can do multiple choice, which does, and you can set it to have them go back and rewatch if they don't answer correctly. So there are some names on there. So I want to just, you know, be respectful of my students, but you got a glimpse that you're able to see from your perspective how many questions were answered. You can actually go in and look at their open-ended questions more closely. And to be honest, the way I've used this is before class. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with this idea of flipped instruction, where you have an on-the-ground class where you put a video out ahead of time for the students to watch before they come to class. And so I use the data that comes back from the students to drive how I discuss the topic when they come to class at the next meeting.
So what are some of the unique learning activities you incorporate for students? How do you ensure that you maintain connections with students and support their connections with one another?
Okay, I think I may have jumped the gun, but I did share Flipgrid. I think Flipgrid is a great way for students to interact with one another in that they can watch each other's videos. Padlet is another great way, and they can respond to one another. I was
Yammer. I never even heard about Yammer till this moment. Pretty good for that.
Yeah, that would be a great way as well. Yeah.
Any other comments?
Yeah, so I was just going to share on the interactive ideas. This was also about connecting students. And so I think there are different ways that we can think about connecting students, so we can have them collaborate on presentations together. Now that we have Google Suite, you know, they can collaborate on a set of Google Slides to, you know, co-construct a presentation, co-develop a presentation. Also, I like to use Voxer. I dropped it in the chat earlier. I don't know if anyone is familiar with it. I've used that before, and it kind of works as a walkie-talkie, but the students and you can talk, you know, throughout the day, or if you don't want that level of access, it could be a designated time that you ask students to respond to a prompt, and they can either video, text, or just audio record themselves in it. And I'll drop the link for that too, just to share. And I even can, for those of you who might be interested, I can put you into a Voxer group and we can experience that together. So if you want to experience Voxer, just drop in the chat, add me. And then when we pull this chat later, we'll make sure we add you to a Voxer group.
I just wanted to also add, let's not forget some of the low-tech ways to connect with our students: phone calls, emails, FaceTiming. Those are still accessible, and I think that we should be open to using the technology that is available, but also go to the stuff that we already know how to use, like a phone, if you needed to. Really quickly, how do you adapt your syllabi for online instructions? What sections do you add to address the shift from the face-to-face to the online? What about textbooks? What are we thinking as a group?
So I know Conroy is going to jump in on this on the syllabus side, and I will just say I did drop in, someone asked the question earlier about textbooks. Vital Source is my sound okay now, you guys? Or am I doing, oh good, I know I was spotty earlier. Vital Source and University of Redlands is on the Vital Source list, and Vital Source is working with publishers who are responding to the COVID-19 crisis. So if you have students who purchased a book while they were on ground and now they can't, access the book, or if you have students who need to find lower cost books. I've had where a $185 book has cost $29 for the ebook for students on Vital Source. So definitely check them out. And then also open source. Armacost Library supports open source materials. And then also, if you haven't already heard of the Netflix documentaries coming down, having access to the Netflix documentaries to incorporate instead of textbooks is good. We also have Canopy through the University of Redlands that has a list of great documentaries. And so I'll drop those links as I pass the mic to Conroy.
I think while he's looking for the screen about the syllabus, I know that moving from the ground, brick and mortar, to online spaces, things might have to change with your syllabus. So you would have to be pretty thoughtful about which items that you choose to cover and how you would be covering it. So there might be some updates, but I would defer to Conroy.
All right.
Let me give a concrete example of how I think syllabus sometimes change. I think that one thing I have observed as we have put classes online in the School of Education is often syllabi include almost a checklist of activities that will be people will be completing as a part of a week's class. So as opposed to listing general topics, you might actually list out that there are video to watch, there's a chat to complete, there's a set of discussion questions to engage in, there's a Flipgrid to post to, there is a Kahoot to record on, and so that there's a to the completion of this week is these things, and it could involve synchronous and asynchronous items, right? And so students are clear about the things to do for each week, and that's a difference that I've seen and how faculty have developed their syllabus for an online class as compared to an only in-person class.
So this was a really good discussion where at the end of the first webinar, I just wanted to thank the panelists for their input. Nicole, do you have some final words?
Yes, we just wanted to really thank you all for joining us today. We just think about moving forward because we're seeing a lot of great questions, a lot of great, some great thinking about how we might all contribute to this. And I know some people are dropping it in the Q&A or even sending me private messages about other resources that really sound great. I'm hearing about Loom as another resource from Marcina Riley. Loom as another resource for being able to blend the ability to cast a screen and record yourself. And so we'd like to, as a community, continue this conversation and think about how we can, learn some of these tools together, learn alongside each other. So we have some upcoming dates, 4:30 to 5:30 for the next 4 Thursdays, and we'll do deeper dives into the 4 primary areas. If you didn't have a chance to watch the primer video created by Andrew, check that out because it covers the 4 areas that we'll dive deeper into at our follow-up sessions. We also want to make sure that you know what else is available for you on the Redlands campus. ACITS has amazing resources. Many of you know this already. The Hunsaker Teaching Program has an ongoing session as well to jump in and have dialogue. And then we also want your feedback. So I am also going to drop in the chat a feedback survey because as much as we know what we want to know, we want to know what you want to know. So we're hoping to find out more from you about what you want us to dive deeper into and discuss. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Andrew for any final thoughts before we log out.
Well, I'm going to attempt to answer a couple questions that I've seen in the chat. First is we will put together the resources from this session and send that information out. We've been sending out support messages to our faculty, and we'll send that as a message. That's a response to one question. And then Marie Martin had a really good question. Are we expecting every module for this summer to be built at the beginning of the term? Marie, that's such a good question. The answer is no. reality is, if we knew, a year in advance we were going to be teaching all of our classes online, we might have asked faculty to have their entire class completed before they started. That's what we've tried to do with online classes when we have lots of prep time. But we fully recognize that you may be running a week ahead of your students, and that's okay. We want you to do the very best you can. We recognize that that's the reality, and just work and communicate with students what they can expect, right, in terms of when you'll have materials up and whether you're 2 weeks ahead or 3 weeks ahead. We fully understand the reality of preparing a class. It takes a lot of time to prepare a class online. And then I think, I want to just share with you, we hire faculty because of your content knowledge and your pedagogical knowledge. And we realize that you bring immense skill in terms of content knowledge and pedagogical knowledge, and that integrating that with this technological piece takes time and energy. And it's gonna take experimentation. You can see even in this webinar, none of us have been, I think, except maybe Nicole and Nana, have been actually in control of a webinar before. And so everyone was trying to learn as we were going along. And while it went pretty well, I certainly think we could all reflect and say, hey, there are these things that we learned as we did this. And that's the mastering of the technology piece in combination with pedagogy and content. And so conceptually, at least, we're deeply appreciative of that. We want to continue to give you tools that you can use, and we're really thankful that you're on this journey with us and being so flexible in the time. And one thing I would close with, and that is the research on online learning suggests that the single most important factor of a student's experience is the social presence of the teacher. It is not the technology tools. It is not how sophisticated you are in operating those tools. It is, in fact, whether you're on regular communication, whether you are present in the class. And don't forget that. Students, I think, can be tremendously forgiving if you're present and you're trying and it's clear that you are. I just want to thank everyone. I don't know if others have comments, but I'm really appreciative of the faculty for putting this together, and of them sharing so openly what they're doing in their classes.
That was well said. We do appreciate you all coming. Say that you can log out. We'll save the conversation that was happening in the chat and hopefully be getting back to everyone at our subsequent.
And one last thing we want to do is thank Nina for joining us today. She introduced us all and facilitated this discussion, but for those of you who don't know, Nina was our adjunct faculty of the year of teaching and excellence in the teaching and learning department. And so we're appreciative of her ongoing and continued support with the School of Education. So thank you as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.